So here we have a GarageBand for iOS Compendium A to Z. In the timestamps below you'll see a whole range of subjects ranging from Alchemy Synth to world instruments and lots of stuff in between. So feel free to scroll through. If I haven't explained anything on one of my other videos, of which there are lots and lots of links below, I will explain it very briefly here. So happy searching. Okay, so starting at letter A, we've got the Alchemy Synth. You access this by adding a new track, and then keyboard, and then there's a button that is dedicated to the Alchemy Synth itself. It's the sort of flagship synthesizer of GarageBand. So essentially you can call up any sounds with the label here. I've made a video on this as well, but the most important thing to remember when you're trying this out is that if you swipe to the left, you get extra controls up here. So don't forget those. Okay, so next up we've got Analyser. Now what's this? Well, it's an equalizer. It just basically analyzes what's going on with the sound. So if I pick the piano here, go to Settings, Plugins and EQ, Visual EQ, and then the Analyzer button here on the bottom left will draw a graph of what's happening, like this. So it shows you the frequencies. It's not useful on its own. You've got to use your ears, but it can pinpoint problems or deficiencies in the sound that will enable you to then tweak that with the EQ. Now, next up, we've got audio files. Now, what's that mean? Well, in the loops here, the loops button, we've got audio files in the middle, and you can drag in anything that you have either shared or you've got from the cloud or anywhere else, and you can drag those into your project. Audio recorder next up. So that is the way of recording using the internal mic onto GarageBand. You can also use things like the iRig from IK Multimedia, or you can use an external mic that connects to the Lightning connector. The audio recorder essentially records 24-bit at 44.1 kilohertz sampling frequency. Now, you can switch the 24-bit off. So if you go to Song Settings, you can go to Advanced 24-bit audio resolution. Switch on to record, mix or export audio in 24-bit resolution. If you have it unchecked, it's 16-bit, but 16 bits perfectly good enough, and you can save memory as well. Now, next up, we've got audio unit extensions. What are those? Well, if we go into plugins and EQ, where we are, I've made a video on this as well. Click on the link. If you go to Edit, you can add either effects that are built into GarageBand itself or audio unit extensions, which are this row of other things here. They look fairly uninspiring, but they're very powerful, so check those out. Bass. Now, this is essentially a very powerful instrument for putting your bass lines into GarageBand. We've got essentially 3 different ways of doing it. You can either use a scale, or you can use notes if you're a bass player, or you can use smart bass. Now, the sounds available, we have a muted sound. There's like a Liverpool thing, which is quite cool. And we have got all these other sounds here. Now, not forgetting the upright bass that we've got here. Now, the upright bass is very playable here because it gives you a sort of the neck, and you get the spots here for playing that. Of course, with any of these, you can opt to have the scale as well, which gives you a bit more control, because upright bass is quite tricky to play if you sort of don't get your fingers in the right place. So we've got a C major scale. There we go. So next up, we've got the bass amp. Now, this is under your amplifier sections here. Bass amp. Now, this is obviously very different to a guitar amp, and you've got several different models. We've got a sort of an Ampeg thing here, like a modern sort of thing, and then a valve amp, and then a DI box. Try these out. Now, when you try any of these out, you need to make sure that you've enabled your monitor here. So if I enable that now, 1, 2, 2, you can hear my voice going through the bass amp. There we go. Okay. So Next up, we've got the beat sequencer. What is a beat sequencer? Well, it's a way of programming your drums by just clicking on various sort of buttons here. So bass, snare, and then your hi-hats. And I've made a video about that as well. Bit Crusher. What is that about? Well, it's under the effects banner. If I go to the piano, click on here, go to plugins and EQ, edit and add. I've got a bit crusher, which basically enables me to sort of lower the bit depth, which means that it sounds all sort of 80s and crunchy. So if I just solo the piano, sounds fairly dreadful. I describe this and all the other effects that are built into GarageBand on a separate video. Okay, next up we've got chords. Now, if I want to use chords instead of playing the piano, I could go to Smart Piano, and it gives me chords at the touch of a button. On the piano here, the grey bit means your left hand, or your bass, and then your chords up here. You can edit chords by going up to the spanner and then clicking on Edit Chords, and you can change any of these chords to any other chord. And you can see there's lots of extensions, and you can even change the bass note. Very, very powerful. So, next up we've got chorus. Now, what's a chorus? Well, it's an effect that enables you to make it sound as if there's more than one thing playing. So if I put a chorus on the piano, plugins and EQ, edit, go to the chorus. Now we've got this. Get some pretty mad effects out of it. Don't overuse that because it's not very nice otherwise. So, next up we've got the clavinet. Now, what's the clavinet? Well, if you listen to Superstition by Stevie Wonder, you then will basically know what the clavinet sounds like. So that is in the keyboard sounds. If you go to more sounds, then it shows up in keyboards, and then you've got smooth clav with various effects that pertain to the clavinet, like phasing and auto wah, for example. You can see a version of that. You can see a demo of the clavinet on my channel. Compressor. Right, the $64,000 effect. Basically what this does is it squeezes the overall volume level. So if I go back to my piano, play that back, take the chorus away, as you ramp the compressor up, it has the effect of equalizing the volume level of all of those notes there. Useful in some ways, not very useful in others. Right, the count-in. Next up, whenever you press record, you can see that you get a count-in. And it'll always give you time to start playing. Now you can go and have a look at song settings, metronome and count-in. You can either decide on a counter or on a visual count-in or nothing at all. You can also change the sound that you have, and you can change the metronome level. Very useful. Okay, cut and paste. Now this is as anything on a conventional sort of device. If you click here, and you can go copy, put the cursor somewhere else and click paste. Easy as that. The undo button is up the top here, and that will get rid of my pasted track there. So distortion. Next up we've got, sticking with the piano sound because it's nice and convenient, if I go to plugins and EQ and edit, get rid of the chorus that I've just demonstrated and put distortion on instead, you can make it sound fairly horrible. There we go. Now, drummer. This is a very much a flagship sort of Apple thing where you can click, you can essentially get a drummer to play immediately. Let's try acoustic drums and just press play. Take away the piano and just listen to drummer. it will line up to the tempo of your track. Usually you'd put drummer down first, but that's fine. Let's delete that. Delete that. So, drums. Now, drummer is just one of many ways that you can input the drums. We've just gone through the step edit version as well, or the beat sequencer. You can either play the drums in using drummer, or you can actually tap on the pads themselves by going acoustic drums. Fear not if you get the timing slightly wrong, because you can quantize afterwards, and I'll go through quantization in a minute. So, apart from that, we've also got the smart drums, which enables you to just drag a bass drum in. Maybe we want it loud and complicated. Drag other things in. You can decide on either electronic drums, or you could change the sounds to more of an acoustic thing. There we go, something like that. Now with these, you can also edit stuff afterwards. You can merge stuff, you can put it through effect, you can put any of these sounds through effects at all. Now, duplicate. If I wanted to duplicate this track, this drum track, you just press once on the icon and duplicate, and it'll give you exactly the same sound again. It'll also duplicate the plugins that are also there. So just delete that, so I don't run out of tracks during this demonstration. There's a piano, and I'll get rid of, just check there's nothing there either. Okay, the track that I'm using at the moment is my version of Skyfall, and you can see that on my channel as well. So, echo. What is echo? Well, it's the same as, well, the same in this case as delay. Now, if I just go back to the, go to here, the piano once again, and solo this out. Take away the distortion, because that's fairly manky. Distortion, okay. So, we've got two echoes here. We've either got the master echo, which you access via here. Now, the master echo you can adjust by going to Master Effects and Echo, and it'll give you a few little presets. But you can get much more specific with the echo. If I go into Plugins and EQ, Edit, let's get rid of the distortion, and then add a track echo instead. Here you can decide all sorts of features. You can see a version, you can see the full demo of this on my channel as well. Edit. Now, let's assume that I've got a note wrong in the piano. You can click on any of these parts and then edit it. And then what you see essentially is a piano roll with all of the notes vertically and the rhythm this way. So you can drag anything backwards and forwards, or you can change the length. If we go to this note, if you drag on the, if you click on the left hand side and hold, it'll give you a much bigger scale to work with. If you drag on the right hand side, it'll change the length of the note, and then you can just click the note itself to drag it up or down in terms of pitch. Okay, so there we go. I'll just get rid of that echo while I'm here before I forget. Plugins and EQ, track echo, yeah, just take it away. Take away the compressor and the visual EQ as well. Okay, now effects. All of these effects. So E for effects, plugins, they're sometimes known as well. Plugins is more of a computer term. Effects is more of a term, you know, with studio sort of bits of hardware. But essentially all of your effects you can add here. The order of the effects is very important. If you put the distortion before any of the other effects, it'll distort those effects as well. Whereas you might want to put the, for example, the track echo at the end. If I just grab that, you can change the order of the effects. It does make a difference. Effect EQ. Now, with some of these things, when you record, for example, if I click on Audio Recorder and click Instrument, for example, the tone control here, I just literally just record 2 bars. There we go, I'm just recording that voice now. Okay, going back to here, just looking at the audio file that I've just recorded. There we go, I'm just recording that. If we look at the effects, plugins and EQ, you'll notice that there's something called Effect EQ, and that was the tone that you set in the actual sort of interface for recording. So there's no adjustment, you can either have it on or off. Okay, so electric drums. Now the drum sounds available here are numerous. We've got the acoustic drums and we've got electronic drums, and you've got a few different sort of choices here. You can either have the drummer, which it sort of decides the instrument for you, or you can come out here and go to the drums here where you can go to electric drums. Electronic, and it'll give you a load of different things here that are also played with pads. Yeah, great. I've made a few tunes, a few sort of 1980s style recordings using the electronic drums. Electronic pianos. This is where we start things like the Fender Rhodes, the famous Fender Rhodes. This is a very important keyboard instrument of the 20th century, and also with the Wurlitzer piano. You can find these on keyboard. You go to More Sounds, and then you go to, back. We can go to electric piano, which is this one, or Whirly. Those are the two main electric pianos. As with the other touch instruments, you can decide whether you want to use chords or keys. And some of the electric pianos have got adjustments as well on them, like the tremolo, which is left to right, and you can also auto play on lots of these things as well. There we go, that was one of the chords I adjusted just now. Okay, EQ stands for equalization, and it is mostly used as a corrective tool. So if I go to piano again here, just solo this out, go to here, plugins and EQ, and visual EQ. This is where you have your bass and your treble and your middle, so you can correct any deficiencies, or you can use it as an effect as well. You can't automate what I've just done, but you know, essentially you can balance the bass, the middle and the treble. There are more complicated equalizers in the audio unit extensions. You can see a demo of that as well. Now, Erhu. What a fantastic bit of kit that is, and what an unusual addition to GarageBand it is. But it's immensely powerful. It's a 2-string violin from, I think, the west of China, and that's in the World Instruments, and you can just have all sorts of fun with this. Great, we like that. It's really nice to use as an effect. Now, next up we've got export. Now this is how you communicate your GarageBand project to the outside world. So if I just unsolo that so that everything is here. What you essentially do is, if you want to create a mix of this, you can basically merge it, or you can go to My Songs, and there we go, Skyfall. Oh, didn't mean to tap on that. Skyfall. Now what you can do is you can click and hold on this, and then you can click share, and that will export your project. You can export it as a project to somebody else, so it maintains all the track settings and effects, or you can export it as a song, or you can create a custom ringtone. Fantastic, we like that. Now you can also export tracks. If you can trick this by merging one track at once. Say you just wanted to send the piano part to somebody, you could just click on this and go merge, and then it'll create an audio version of this underneath, pertaining to the length of the song, and then you can use that as an audio file. There it is, there's your audio file of your piano. So I'm just going to undo that, get rid of that. Okay, you can send that to somebody. Now, external. Now this is where you go to find audio unit extensions, which are things that you can buy that will work with GarageBand, or inter-app audio, which actually uses other things that you've got on your iPad. I've got a couple of other things like Funkbox or the Moog synthesizer. That works nicely. So, fade out. Now, this is a tool where you can make your tune fade out at the very end. It doesn't give you much control, but it'll allow you to, it'll just fade it right out at the end for you. There is another way of doing this, and that is the automation, which I haven't gone through yet, but that's essentially the volume levels. I've forgotten to put that on my A to Z, so I will put a timestamp for that. Now, fills. When you use the drummer here, you can decide on the complexity of the fills by simply dragging a slider. Minimum fills, that is none, and maximum, which you don't really want. As my uncle says to the drummer, you're allowed one fill out of the verse into the chorus and one fill back into the verse. Drummers discuss and obviously disagree at your leisure. I'm kind of halfway in between. Sitting on the fence. Flanger, that's another effect. You can see that on my my video about the effects. Essentially, it's right in your, if I just go to track reverb and delete that, it's available in the list here. It sounds very nice. You've got all sorts of controls here. Effects. FX, that's another way of describing effects as a word. Now, gain. What does this mean then? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll show you. If you go on one of these, go to settings, you can change the gain of an individual audio file. Let's say you've got something like this that is actually quite low. You can change the gain. 12 dB is a lot of gain. That is actually 4 times the level. 6 dB represents a doubling or halving. And you can obviously change the gain up or down. So there we go. Guitars. Now the GarageBand has a really good interface for guitars. If I just click plus and go to guitars, you can either have the notes on the guitar fretboard, you can tap on strings, you can bend one of them to create a pitch bend, you can either have notes or you can use chords. Create a strumming pattern either manually or using autoplay. Autoplay, if you have 2 fingers, it changes the sound. 3 fingers, once again. So, guitar amps, similar to bass amps, you just plug your iRig in and you can have lots and lots of things, clean or distorted. You can go to more sounds if you like, to select them via that interface if you like. Lots of these can all be edited, and if I just maybe just have one of them here, you can add guitar pedals. There's a library of stuff down here. If I click on an empty space, you can add all sorts of effects, and you can drag one with respect to the other as you would on the audio effects. So there we go. Now, next up, we've got the Guzheng. That is another world instrument. And you can see that demonstrated on the same video as the Erhu that I've just shown you here. So, where are we? Guzheng. It's like a Japanese harp, well, it's a Chinese harp. You can change the scale, or you can have chords. And you can also have a repeat rate, so you can actually have slow or fast with the button at the bottom. Now, Hammond Organ. This is how you make your recording sound really expensive. Now, if you go to the keyboard and more sounds and go to the heavy metal organ, for example, you can see that you've got a range of drawbars here which change the sound. It's got a Leslie speaker built in, slow or fast. You have percussion, a chorus, and a distortion control. When you record, it'll remember not only the settings of the drawbars, which you can't edit afterwards, but it's also got the Leslie rotation, which you can edit. So there we go. Have a look on the detailed video for that. Instruments, we've got all the instruments on here. So we're into I now. Into app audio I described just now, where you can bring in another thing that's on your iPad and you can record with that into GarageBand. Very nice. Just allows you a massive sort of load of possibilities. There's a joystick in drummer. If you drag this to loud or soft, simple or complex, there's also a joystick on the Alchemy Synth, which you can just make very quick adjustments to your sounds. Now, keyboard connecting. Well, we've got keyboards and keyboard connecting. Every keyboard instrument that we have here comes with a touch sensitive keyboard, which you can change the velocity with this slider. So you can have it either quiet. I've obviously got something soloed somewhere. I've got the volume down. There we go. So if we go into here, you can change your octave on any of these. You can sustain it. Very, very useful. And you can also change the velocity. Now you can have the velocity wider by opening your fingers up there. That's really wide ranging. Fantastic. Now you can change that afterwards. I'll cover that in velocity in a minute. Okay, key signature. This is what your song is recorded in, and it's selectable here, either major or minor. You can change this after you've started a song, but make sure that you just switch off so that you don't transpose any of the recordings that you've made. So everywhere between C and B, which is all 12 semitones, major or minor. And that changes the chords that are available in your piano. Koto, another world instrument. So if I go back to here, Koto is the Japanese harp. And it's fantastic sounding. It sounds very similar to that Chinese one, but it just gives you a slightly different sound. But it's really nice to have these basically available on GarageBand, because it's just, you can't get that sound anywhere else. It's fantastic. And you can change the scale. So moving on, we've got live loops. Now this is, at the moment I'm working with tracks here, but if you go to My Songs and you click plus, you get two choices. You get either tracks, which we've been working with so far, or live loops, which gives you basically like a selection of things that you can press to create your own sort of soundscapes. I've made a video also on making my own live loops, which you can record with. And there we go. Master effects. Now, if I go back into the song that I had just now, Skyfall, there we go. Now, when you go into your effects settings, master effects, you have both an echo and a reverb. Now, you can adjust both of these. You could say reverb, I want to have cathedral or moon dome or ambience or whatever. Now, you can't edit these per se, but it's nice to have a sort of global reverb that you can just call on quickly. Merge. Now, I went through that just now. This is how you create a mix of your song. Or you can decide just to merge maybe just the bass, the drums and the piano, for example. If you wanted to go out with this and do a gig or whatever, you can just essentially click merge, and then you can just merge whichever tracks you like. You don't have to use all of them. And then when you click merge, it creates a separate audio file and it saves a version of this song before you do that. So you don't need to worry about losing any data. Metronome, we've just gone through here. The metronome is switchable on and off with the metronome symbol at the top here. It's either blue when it's on or white when it's off. You can opt to have that when you're recording, or you can record without the metronome. Let's say you're doing some spoken word and you don't need to have bars or beats. Now, Microphaser, that is one of the effects available in plugins and EQ. If I just go here, Microphaser, very nice indeed. So just have that. Ooh, nice. I like that very much. Mixing. Now, mixing facilities on GarageBand are perhaps a little bit limiting in terms of things like mixing desks, but the sliders are all here, and you also got a pan control for each channel here, and you have finer control of your track volume here. If the button is yellow, it means that you have automation loaded. Automation is a very, very useful way of creating volume changes as you're going through. Pencil tool, click on a point, and there you have your automation, and you can undo any of these steps. There we go. Now, when you're doing mixing, there's many different techniques that you need to employ. You can see lots of videos about that on my channel. Mono. How do you create a mono version of your mix on GarageBand, and why would you want to? Well, you can see my video on mono mixing to find out. It's more stylistic for older styles of music, perhaps gypsy jazz or traditional jazz or very early blues or something like that. And you can also check that your stereo compatibility works with things like alarm clock radios and mobile phones, etc., etc. Multi-take recording. Now, this is a very, very nice thing indeed. This allows you to essentially record lots and lots of takes and then choose the best one. That's pretty good. Now, how you find this is in song settings. If we go, the track settings, and you have recording and multi-take recording on. So it'll apply to every track in your song when multi-track recording is switched on. So it's not just this track. So you can record, let's say I've got a 2-bar loop, you can record that 2 bars and it'll keep recording until you find the take that you like. Experiment with that, it's quite powerful. Mute. Every channel has got a solo button, which I've used a few times now to listen to just the piano only. Ooh, complete with that phaser on it, which I shall just get rid of while I'm here. You can also mute each channel with the speaker symbol, and it greys out on the main display, which stops you hearing that channel. Useful, it's kind of the opposite of solo. Now, new track. Whenever you want a new track, you click the plus button at the bottom. If it doesn't add a new track, it means that you've used the maximum number. So when you add a new track, it'll give you the main menu that you had just then. Moving on, we've got Notepad. Now, that's the help, that's the question mark, which will allow you also to GarageBand to sort of give you a bit of a hand doing stuff. So if we go to song settings, we can have a notepad where you can make all sorts of notes about the session or whatever. Useful thing to have, especially if there are any sort of settings that you need to change or anything that you need to work on. So orchestral, this is where you get an orchestral, you get lots and lots of orchestral instruments. And if I just select this, now lots of these, you can either play strings using the strings interface, which is here, or you can go to the keyboard sound and click more sounds where you have other, and you get a lot of orchestral sounds here. You've got some brass, you've got some the flute, the clarinet, oboe, bassoon, and you can also play the strings via the keyboard interface, which is quite useful, especially if you want to create play a solo violin and you're not a violinist. You can play it using the keyboard instead. You can also address the guitars and the bass and lots of other things, including the world instruments. Now, moving on, we've got the organ, which, well, there's the Hammond organ, which I've already gone through. Overdrive. This is basically a more sort of subtle version of distortion, essentially. Now, if I get distortion here, it's very, very loud. But if I change that to overdrive, you get a much more subtle version. Which just enables you to make an instrument sound a little bit gritty. Now, pan, I've already gone through that, where you can go left or right with any of your channels. See my videos about stereo mixing and the pitfalls and all sorts of things that you might encounter. Percussion, next up. Percussion is under, well, there's a couple of places actually. You can either play percussion using the drums, the drum pads, many different sounds which you can access via these this menu here, or you can go into Drummer and get percussion loops. Very nice indeed. And you can change between, well, I think it's Isabella at the moment, but you can basically change your style there, and you've got all sorts of options here. The possibilities, the number of permutations and combinations is pretty, well, infinite really. Phaser, I've just gone through that by calling that Microphaser. The piano, we've been using the piano. There are two different pianos available on GarageBand. We have either the classical piano or the grand piano. The classical piano is a much more refined version. You can see that on my channel. If I go to more sounds and keyboards, you can have classical grand, or you can have grand piano, which is more of a rock piano really. So as with the pianos, you can have your scales, you can have smart chords, you can split the keyboards as well. You can have two of them. So in case you need to do left hand and right hand, that's quite useful if you need to input something sort of quickly and easily, and also on the same track. Velocity, you can essentially set the volume. You can change the octave here, so you can get really low notes or really high ones. There we go. Now, moving on, we've got the Pipa. That is another of the world instruments and an extremely useful addition to GarageBand. That's the last of the 4 world instruments. Now, of course, I'm recording this in mid-2019. There may be more instruments available on new iOS, but essentially the idea is the same. You can have chords as well, and autoplay. Very nice. There's so much here. Now, moving on. The next one is called Plugins and EQ. I've been using that a lot of the time. That's where you get your effects, your equalizers as well. Quantising. Now, this is where you have to, if you play a part in, let's say if I go to My Songs and I go to a new song and choose a guitar, for example, and I'm going to choose notes. Now, when you play something in, you have to then make sure that the timing is right. And when you go back to the beginning and you want to make sure that that is in time, we go to Settings, Track Settings, Quantization, and then you have a range of options. You can either set straight, which is straight quavers, or swing quavers, or you can have triplets if you want. You get a range of options. Quarter note is a beat, half beat is an eighth of a note, and so on and so forth. So 16th note is the quickest note that I had, and there we go. That is now in time. You can do this with any of the instruments, any of the string sounds. You can change the quantization as you go. There's masses. Now, when you put drums in, it automatically quantizes it if it's the first track. Now, moving on, we've got reverb. Now, reverberation. This is what makes your sound really atmospheric. If I've got the guitar here, I've got the reverb down here. The more reverb I add, the more distant it will sound. You can either access the reverb from here, or you can go to Plugins and EQ, Edit, and add your own track reverb, which enables you to get a few different things, a few different settings. You can have the reverb time at 20 seconds if you want, which sounds like this. Yeah, okay. You might want that. You have pre-delay. I've made a video about the reverb controls. You can see that on my Plugins and EQ video. Reverse. Now, if I have an audio file, let's just go to my microphone and I just record. Now, fun and clean gets you the something which doesn't have any effects on at all. If I go 1, 2. If I go back to my main window, I can click on this and go to Settings, and I can opt to reverse the file. This is really clever because you can get a crash cymbal and turn it round. That's a nice build up. So you can hear, if I mute the guitar now, that you can hear my voice backwards. So you can get all your subliminal messages on your tunes that way. Now, sampler. This is arguably a huge addition to GarageBand because it allows you to sample anything via the internal mic. I've made a video about this. You can see the level there. I'm going to start and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then your keyboard will be able to play that back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At any pitch.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3.
But of course the pitch changes the speed as well as it would do on a classic sampler. Masses are possible here, and you can edit the beginning and the end here. You can also change the shape so that you can have an initial sort of peak and then it trims, then it tails off.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You can trim that by this, and you can also tune it as well.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
When you tune it, it gives you a little note to compare it with as well. All sorts is possible. So, scales. This is where, if you're not sure of the scale to play on a piano, you can choose that. So if I go to more sounds and classical grand, for example, my scale here, you can choose between all of these different scale types, and they will all link to the key that you have set on your song settings. So major scale, you can have C major. That means you don't need to worry about the sharps and flats, and you can also have things like pentatonic, which are even safer. So you can create a nice glissando. The scales, sometimes the scales are sort of appropriate to the instrument. For example, the Japanese harp, it puts a Japanese scale there, but you can change that to a Western scale. So, moving on, sharing, I've already covered that with exporting. Smart instruments is things like when you have your guitars, where you can actually smart strings. Let's go for that. So, smart strings is essentially chords. Now, moving on. Solo, I've covered that. I'm just going to, well, in fact, I'll cover that in strings in a minute. So, song sections. Each GarageBand file has a sort of setting where you can add sections. So, section B, section C, and you can work on these separately or all of them all at once, and you can see a little B and a C. If you want to work on section B only, you just click on section B and then come out of that, and you're just working with that section of your tune. Fine. Song settings I've just covered here. There are a few things here. You can set the tempo here, you can set the time signature 3 4 4 4 6 8, the key signature, whether you fade out, jam session if you've got other people, I haven't covered that, and then advanced settings where you can have your 24-bit, or you can decide on multi-track recording, but you need an external piece of kit to do that. The sort of purpose of this video is to show you what's in the box rather than adding other external things. I don't cover those because there are conflicts with those. Some things don't work with iOS, this, that or the other. Literally in the box. You can send a MIDI clock if you like, which is quite cool. You can link that up with a computer or a digital audio workstation or anything else. And you can also add your Bluetooth MIDI devices here if you've got such a thing. Bluetooth does incur a delay, so you've got to be very careful that you don't accidentally sort of play something in. Bluetooth is subject to a delay. Sound library, next up. The sound library enables you to download things from the internet, download new packages as they become available. The little number 2 there signifies that I've got something waiting for me. I won't do that now. So speed, that's the tempo. You can also adjust, if I just go on to the song section A, I can adjust the speed of the audio file that I worked with just now by clicking on edit, or settings rather, and I can actually increase the speed of it. Now. And you have first you have speed 1, 2 and 4, and then the other way halving or quartering. So I can have it much quicker. Now. Yeah, easy. So you can change the speed of those. Split. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can split any track by putting the cursor over here, clicking on here, and then split. It reveals a pair of scissors which you can then draw across it, making 2 separate audio files, which you can drag like that. You can also drag the edge of an audio file to make it longer or shorter to edit that as well. Step editing, I've covered that in Beats Sequencer. Straight is the quantization that we had, where you have straight quavers or swing quavers. Straight and swing there. Now, just covering the strings very briefly, we've got, let's have a look, more sounds. Let's go for cinematic. The strings are multi-capable. If you tap, you get pizzicato. If you draw across slowly like that, you get a chord that holds. If you draw across quickly, you get a sort of a marcato sort of thing, which is very nice, or like a staccato, as some people like to call it. Or you can also drag across very slowly to get a quiet sound, or fast to get it, make it louder. How intuitive is that? Synths. Now, various synthesizers are built into GarageBand. Not only the Alchemy Synth. If you go to more sounds, you can choose some classic sort of synth-based instruments which have some controls with them. Very nice. Tempo I've already covered in here. You can set your tempo by going to song settings, tap to, and you can also tap to set the tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you can drag it here, or you can do that. Be careful with the tempo because it doesn't change audio files, it simply puts them in a different place, and we don't want that. Time signature, you can set 4/4, 3/4 or 6/8. That is enough for most people's requirements. You can have other time signatures like 5/8 and 7/8 by programming drums up to make it work, and then making sure that the metronome is, you just ignore the 4, the 3 or the 6. There are various ways to do that. Toy box. No sort of sound set would be complete without having some really weird sounds. Toy piano. You might think there's no point in having it. Well, it's another sound. The more sounds you got, the more palettes you have. It doesn't matter that it's got the word toy in front of it. Now you can have a sort of a mini marimba or music box. You listen to Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, there's a music box in it. Now, track echo and track reverb I've just covered. Track settings, this is where you access all of your settings, including the plugins and EQ. You have a solo and a mute button and volume as well. You have quantization, transposition. You can transpose stuff. Now that's the next thing here. Transposition, you can change any of your MIDI settings, either in octaves or semitones. Very, very useful. That's a good get out of jail free in case you've accidentally set the key as well. Now, transport bar. I know that's technically before transposition. Transport bar is where you get your play and record. In order to fast forward, you just grab the cursor and move it to where you like. The play button lights up green when it's on. No. The stop button doubles as a back to the beginning button, and the record button gives you a count in of 4 beats before you come in. So, moving on, we've got the tremolo, which is basically a volume modulator. If I select the guitar here and go to plugins and EQ and edit, I can find a tremolo, which basically just varies the volume at a rate set by this slider here. You can either make it cross the speakers if you have your stereo phase on, or make it more on and off with 0 degrees in the middle, and you can set the depth as well. Triplet. Now this is set in your track settings and quantization. If you've recorded something that's mostly in triplets, then you've got an option there to set that. Be careful, but it doesn't really matter if you set the wrong quantization. It still remembers the original inputted notes, so you can change it to anything else without destroying anything, or indeed switch it off if you want. Now, upright bass, I've just gone through that with the bass, where you can find the, now this is slightly elusive in that you find that the bass, if I go to more sounds here, the upright is on a separate page from the other one, so don't forget that it's there. Velocity, this is another word for volume. Now what you can do is you can, if I go to edit here, I can grab one of these notes and change the velocity of it by clicking velocity and then using the slider from soft to loud. You can also, if we go here, you can set the, if I go to settings, you can overall change the velocity if it's all too loud or too soft. Now, moving on, we've got the visual EQ, which I've just shown you just now, where you can go into the EQ and it gives you the pane of bass, middle and treble, and as I said before with the analyzer, you can see what's going on in terms of where the sounds are, where the sort of strengths are or weaknesses across the frequency bands. Moving on, we've got vocals. Now this is where you have to be a bit careful. When you use the internal mic, don't get too close to it, otherwise it'll pick up wind noise. But you can essentially, once you've done this, you can use things like the vocal transformer. So I'll just solo this out to make sure that we've got that in place. Solo that, unsolo that, leaving just the vocal. And this time I'll briefly record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I won't go any further because I can't count further than 8. But when you go back to your window and you can see that the audio file has been recorded, we can go to Effects, Plugins and EQ, Edit, and find our vocal transformer. This allows you to set the pitch or the formants, and I've made a video about that as well. So if I set the pitch higher, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I sound like I did when I was about 9. Now, volume. Now this is the volume of the track. This is the top slider that you have. You can select the track volume. You can either do it in your mixer here, but you get slightly finer control over here, and you can see that one changes the other, either changes the other. So you can set more fine values here. And then lastly, the world instruments, which I've covered individually. Huge possibilities here, and any of these instruments you can put through effects. So there it is. There is an A to Z compendium of GarageBand things, and I hope you have lots and lots of fun. Please post questions in the box below if I've forgotten anything. And as I said, I don't cover third-party plugins or any third-party equipment, only GarageBand that's in the box.